He first heard of her in a tavern near Brokilon, not directly, obliquely, in passing. Two elves at a corner table were speaking quietly in the elder speech, and most of the people in the hall didn't understand a word. Geralt understood enough. Not everything, but enough. Something about blood. Something about the forest. The word hidden. Einsella, literally, she who is in shadow. And one more word that he initially took for a mistake. Caedven. Return. He didn't listen further. Other people's conversations were none of his business. The second time was 3 weeks later, from a dryad in Brokilon, where a contract on a water hag had taken him. The dryad didn't speak of a princess directly. She said, "The forest remembers the promise," and looked at him as though he ought to know which promise she meant. He didn't. The third time was when he found the body. The body lay by the road between Brokilon and Dol Blathanna, on the verge, covered with last year's leaves, as though it had tried to hide even in death. An elf. Young by human standards, though elves stay young for a long time. Well-dressed, not for traveling, brocade, silver buckles, fine leather boots. People like that don't walk forest roads on foot. They ride. And if found on foot, something had gone wrong, killed cleanly. One blow, a narrow blade between the ribs, at an angle that implied skill. Not a robbery. Robbers strike differently, hurriedly, with force, leaving bruises. This was an execution. In the elf's pocket, a medallion. Silver, engraved. A tree with roots growing upward instead of down. A symbol Geralt didn't know, but felt he should. He took the medallion. He couldn't bury the body. The ground was frozen solid. He covered it back with leaves and rode on. Sometimes that's all you can do. Dol Blathanna greeted him with a gray sky and gray-faced people, which was, in general, predictable for an elven enclave in human lands. The ones who lived here were those who hadn't gone with the Aenseda into the forests and hadn't perished in the Great War, those who stayed and tried. With varying results. He stopped his horse beside the first person he came across, an older elf with a basket, a traitor by the look of him, and showed him the medallion. "Do you know what this is?" The elf looked at the medallion, then at Geralt, then at the medallion again. "No," he said. A lie. Geralt could tell by the way the fingers tightened on the basket handle. "All right," said Geralt. "You don't know." He rode on. The medallion stayed in his pocket. Part 2. Iniare. Her name was Iniare. He found her not because he was looking, but because she came out herself. It was on the second day in Dol Blathanna, when he was sitting by the well eating bread and cheese he'd bought from a silent elven woman at the market. Iniare walked over and stood facing him, not young, by human measure around 60, though for elves that was still youth, and looked at him with the expression he had learned to recognize, a person who has made a decision, come to say it aloud, and is slightly afraid. "You found Oinriel," she said. Not a question. "The dead man on the road? If that was his name, yes." Geralt took out the medallion. Was this his? Iniare looked at the medallion for a long time. She had intelligent, tired eyes. "Come," she said. "I'll tell you everything, not because I want to, because there's no other choice left." Her home was small, 2 windows, a low ceiling, shelves of herbs along the walls. The same story as everywhere in the Enclave, an attempt to preserve the old within new walls. The herbs were right, hung correctly. Geralt recognized several, the ones used in wound remedies. A good apothecary. She poured him tea without asking. Bitter, strong, with a piney taste. Elven. Then she sat down across from him and began to speak. 102 years ago, in the last years before the Great War, a child was born to Myrna Eap Aed, the last queen of the elven house of Aed. That in itself was not remarkable. Queens have children, but this child came early. Almost 3 months premature, which among elves meant near certain death. And more, she was born with a mark. "What mark?" asked Geralt. "A patch on her wrist," said Iniare. "Silvery, like an old scar, there from birth. Among elves it is called In Ale, a mark of the blood. An ancient thing, very rare. The last time it appeared," she hesitated, "was 400 years ago. What does it mean?" "Depending on who you ask. According to the old texts, Ain All means the blood carries something, an ability, or a condition, or a promise made by ancestors to gods, and gods have a habit of demanding payment through the generations." She tightened her grip on the cup. "The priests of the house of Aed said, 'The child is special. that her blood could seal the covenant the elves made with the forest long before humans came to the continent. What covenant? The covenant of dwelling. Iniare looked at her cup. You know the old legends? Elves came to the continent before humans, far before. But they came from somewhere else too, from another place. And with that place a covenant was made. Elves may live here as long as they guard the forest, as long as they preserve the balance, as long as there lives in their line blood that remembers. The mark on the wrist, yes. When the line breaks, when no elf remains who carries this blood, the covenant expires, the forest will leave. She raised her eyes. Not just Broccolon, all forests, everywhere. Geralt looked at her. Is this a prophecy, or something real? 100 years ago I would have said a prophecy, said Iniar quietly. Now I say, I have seen what is happening to Broccolon. I have seen the dryads retreat deeper with each year, the trees falling sick, the forest boundary pulling back. A pause. I don't know whether it's because of humans, or because of the covenant, or because of both together. But something is dying. Myrna had hidden the child. The war came soon, and in the war everyone died, including the members of the royal house. Myrna perished at the siege of Ayad Ginvale, but before she died, she passed her daughter, a girl of 3, to trusted people with one order. Hide her. Not train her for war, not prepare her for a throne that no longer existed. Hide her, raise her, and wait. Wait for what? No one knew, said Iniare. Myrna didn't have time to explain. The priest died at the siege. All that remained were rumors and the mark on the girl's wrist. And the girl was hidden for 100 years. 102. Her name was Ayla. Every 20 years those who knew passed her on. New guardians, a new place, a new name. Iniare walked to a shelf and took something down. A small box, wooden, without a lock. Oinriel was the last of the guardians. He was carrying word that Ayla was alive, that she was here, that the time had come. She opened the box. Inside, the same symbol as on the medallion, a tree with inverted roots. What time? I don't know, said Iniare, and that is precisely what frightens me. Part 3. The Truth. He found Ayla the next day. She lived at the outermost house of the Enclave, where Dol Blathana pressed against the forest, and beyond was no longer a village, just trees. The house was tidy, with a kitchen garden, a woven fence, ordinary, deliberately ordinary, the way it looks when someone has been pretending for a very long time. Geralt knocked. The door was opened by a woman. She looked to be about 35, for an elven woman, nearly a child, but her eyes were older, far older, the way it is with those who have carried something heavy for a long time. Witcher, she said, not a question, not surprise. Ayla, he said. She paused for a second, then stepped aside. Come in, she said. I knew someone would come eventually. I didn't know it would be a witcher. She knew everything about herself. That was the first thing that surprised Geralt. He had expected a princess who needed to be protected from the truth. Instead, a woman who had lived with the truth for 100 years and was tired of it. I know about the mark, she said, not waiting for questions. I know about the covenant. I know about the prophecy. She sat at the table, hands folded simply in front of her, without theatricality. They told me from childhood. Every new guardian felt it their duty to explain it again, as though I might have forgotten. What did the prophecy say? Depends on the version, said Oila. There are several. The most popular one, the blood of Aen Ale can renew the covenant with the forest. The one who carries the mark must return to the place of power, an old shrine deep in Broccolon, and perform a ritual. After that, the covenant will hold for another 100 years. That doesn't sound terrible. No, she agreed, until you read further. She stood, went to a shelf, came back with a book, old, leather-bound. Here's the second version, the one the priest didn't like to quote aloud. She opened the book, found the page, read aloud in the elder speech, slowly so Geralt could follow. She who carries the mark does not renew the covenant. She is the covenant. Her blood is not a symbol, it is the payment. The forest will receive her, and the covenant will continue. But she who was will not return. Silence. Geralt looked at her. Death, he said. Yes, said Oila simply. Not a ritual sacrifice with speeches and garlands. Simply, walk into the forest and not come back. The forest receives. The covenant continues. Broccolon remains. She closed the book. The guardians knew this. All those who hid me for 100 years. They knew they were keeping me not for life, for death at the right moment. Geralt was quiet. Did Oinriel know? Yes. He was carrying word that the moment had come, that the forest was dying faster than expected, that waiting was no longer possible. And he was killed before he reached you. Yes. Ayla looked at the table. By those who don't want the ritual to happen. Who? Some of our own, she said. Those who believe the covenant is superstition, that the forest is dying because of humans, not because of the mark, that sacrificing a princess for an old story is a crime. A pause. They killed Oinriel so the word wouldn't reach me, so I wouldn't know the time had come. She smiled, without warmth. They didn't know I already knew. You want to go into the forest? That too was not a question. I have been thinking about it for 100 years, said Ayla. Do you think I lack the time? She finally raised her gaze, direct, without self-pity. I grew up in other people's homes, under other people's names. 20 years in one place, then a move, then another 20 years. I couldn't form attachments to anyone, because I knew, when the time came, I would be gone. A pause. 100 years of solitude for a moment that hadn't arrived yet. And now you tell me Oinriel is dead, so the moment has arrived? And you're going. I'm going. Part 4. Geralt. He could have left. There was no contract, no money offered. This was someone else's story, someone else's forest, someone else's prophecy. He stayed, not because he had to, because a woman who had spent 100 years waiting for her own death deserved at least one person beside her who walked not with her, but wouldn't let her walk entirely alone. It was a weak reason. He knew. He accepted it. They left in the early morning, when Dol Blathanna was still asleep. Iniare knew. Geralt could tell by the way she came out to the gate and stood in silence, not saying farewell aloud. Some goodbyes are louder, without words. The road to Brokilon took half a day. Geralt rode beside her. Ayla walked. He didn't ask why she hadn't taken a horse. Elves sometimes prefer to walk to important places on foot. He knew this and didn't comment. She spoke little, but what she said was precise, without ornamentation. Do you believe in prophecies? She asked somewhere around midday. No, said Geralt. And in covenants? Depends on who made them. With the forest. With the forest. I don't know, he thought. I've seen Brokilon 100 times. The Dryads speak of a boundary that retreats. The trees are sick. Those are facts, not prophecy. But it might be because of humans. It might, or because of the covenant, or both together. A pause. I don't know, and neither do you. No, she agreed. I don't. She walked, eyes down. Here is the strange thing. For 100 years I was certain. I knew what I was living for. I knew how it would end. That was hard, but comprehensible. And now, walking toward it, I think, what if the prophecy doesn't work? What if I die and the forest dies anyway? What if the priests were wrong? Possibly. That's not very comforting. No, Geralt agreed. But it's honest. She looked at him. Are you always like this? Like what? Honest to the point of discomfort. I try. She was quiet for a moment, then said, softly, not to him, more to the trees that were thickening as they drew near Brokilon. I've never been in the forest at night. The guardians wouldn't allow it. Too dangerous. Too much of everything. She almost smiled. They hid the princess so thoroughly that the princess never saw her own forest. Geralt said nothing. Because what is there to say to that? Part 5. Brokilon. The forest boundary was alive. Geralt knew this. He had been here before, knew what you felt when you stepped under the first trees of Brokilon. The air changes, the pressure changes, the medallion begins to vibrate quietly and constantly. Not monsters, the forest itself. Living, ancient, remembering. Ayla stepped under the trees first, and stopped. Geralt didn't see what happened. He felt it. Something changed in her the moment the forest received her. Not physically. She didn't fall, didn't cry out. Just for a moment, the expression on her face shifted. Surprise, almost childlike, as though something had answered. Do you feel that? He asked. Yes, she said. Her voice was different, quieter, more attentive. It's like a voice you've never heard, but which is familiar. A pause. Like recognizing a word in a language you've forgotten. They walked deeper in silence. They found the shrine by evening. Geralt didn't know what he had expected to see. Stones, an altar, something impressive, proportionate to 100 years of waiting. It was a clearing, round, with grass that was greener than the rest of the forest, even now, in late autumn, when everything around had gone dry. In the center, a tree. Old, very old, with roots that surfaced and spread in every direction. No symbols, no inscriptions, just a tree. The medallion sang at the highest note he had ever heard from it. Ayla walked into the clearing slowly, approached the tree, placed her palm against the bark. The silence was complete. Even the birds went quiet. "What do you feel?" asked Geralt from the clearing's edge. "I'm waiting for fear to arrive," she said. "So far there's no fear. That's unexpected." "Good or bad?" "I don't know," she said. "Haven't decided yet." She stood at the tree with her hand on the bark, looking up, to where the branches spread into the sky. The sky above the clearing was clear, cloudless, a rarity for this time of year. "Geralt," she said. Do you know what's strangest?" She didn't turn around. "In 100 years, not once did anyone ask me, 'Do I want this?' The Guardians knew what I was for. They spoke of importance, of necessity, of the forest, the covenant, the elven people." A pause. Not one of them asked, "Do you want it?" A long silence. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know what wanting means when all your life you've known only one thing." She removed her hand from the bark and turned to face him. "But I am choosing. Those are different things. Myrna hid me and didn't ask. The Guardians hid me and didn't ask. You asked." She almost smiled. "Thank you for that." "Don't go," said Geralt. She looked at him. "What?" "Don't go." He stepped onto the clearing. The medallion vibrated harder, but he ignored it. "The prophecy may be wrong. You said so yourself. The priest may have been mistaken. The forest may be dying for other reasons. You don't know for certain. Nobody knows for certain." "Exactly." He stood before her. "You've lived 100 years for a decision made on your behalf before you were born. That is unjust. And I'm not telling you to leave because I want to save you. I'm saying you have the right to choose, to truly choose, knowing that you can walk away. Because if you stay, knowing that, it is your decision, not theirs." Ayla looked at him for a long time. In her gaze was something Geralt couldn't name precisely. Exhaustion and gratitude, and something resembling release, not from an obligation, but from something else. "You're a strange witcher," she said. "I've been told." Part 6. What happened in the clearing. She chose to enter, but on her own terms, not as the prophecy had described, walk in and not return. She said she would enter, give as much blood as the forest took of its own accord, and see what happened, not a surrender, a negotiation, with the forest that her mother had called an ally, not a master. Geralt stayed at the clearing's edge. She approached the tree, drew a small knife, plain, without ornament, a working blade, cut her wrist where the mark was. Not deep, enough for blood to flow. The silvery patch grew pink under the blood and stood out brighter. She pressed her wrist to the bark. What happened next, Geralt couldn't have described precisely, not because he didn't see, but because he saw things for which the language has no adequate words. Light, but not from outside, from within. Movement of roots beneath the earth. He felt it through his soles, a vibration that went down and returned. A smell, sharp, piney, with something else, unfamiliar. Ayla stood straight, didn't fall, didn't lose consciousness. She stood, only her hand on the tree and the blood, and her face was like that of a person listening to a conversation in a language they understand poorly, but understand. It lasted a long time, or not long. Time moved differently in the clearing. Then she took her hand away, looked at her wrist. The wound had closed. The mark was still there, but its color had changed. From silver it had become brighter, almost white. She turned to Geralt. "That's it," she said. "You're alive." "Alive," she confirmed. Her voice was calm, but there was something new in it, something very quiet and very firm at the same time. The forest took what it needed, not everything. A pause. "I think the priest didn't tell the whole story, or didn't know it themselves. The covenant doesn't require death. It requires presence. The mark must be living, not dead." Geralt looked at her. The prophecy was wrong. The prophecy was incomplete. She surveyed the clearing, slowly, carefully, like someone seeing a familiar place for the first time. There is a difference. Part 7. After they left Brokilon at night, the forest released them without resistance. Dryads watched from the trees but didn't attack. One, young, with green hair, stepped out onto the path and looked at Ayla for a long time, then went back, without words. "What did she do?" asked Ayla. "Acknowledged you," said Geralt. "Dryads don't bow, that's their way." Ayla was quiet. Then, "What now?" Geralt thought about it. "That's your question," he said. "Not mine." "I don't know how to plan a life," she said. "I never planned. There was no point." A pause. "It's very strange to think about what will happen tomorrow, and the day after, and in a year." "You'll learn?" "How do you know?" "I don't," he said. "But it's a better outcome than the alternative." She almost laughed. For the first time in both days he had known her. The sound was unexpected. Geralt hadn't anticipated her laugh would be like that. Light. Niara met them at the gate. She hadn't slept. She stood in her cloak, holding a candle. She looked at Ayla, then at her wrist, then back at her face. "You came back," she said. "I came back. What happened?" "The prophecy turned out to be inaccurate," said Ayla. "The priests read only part of the text, or had a faulty manuscript, or didn't want to know the full truth. I don't know. The covenant holds. The forest took the blood. I live." Iniare looked at her for a long time. Something was happening on her face, something Geralt rarely witnessed. An old person who has carried something heavy for too long, and that weight is being set down, carefully, disbelievingly. 100 years, said Iniare. "We hid you for 100 years." "I know. I hid you for 20 of them." A pause. "I thought it was murder on an installment plan. She fell silent. "Iniare," said Ayla. "You kept me alive. That is no small thing." The old elven woman closed her eyes, opened them, nodded. She said nothing more, turned and walked home. Geralt left the next morning. Ayla came out to see him off. She stood at the gate, already without the quiet resignation with which he had first met her 2 days ago. Something had changed, not in her expression, something deeper, in the way she stood, like a person who has spent their whole life waiting for an ending and has only now understood there will be no ending, and doesn't yet know how to live with that, but knows they'll figure it out. "Where to now?" she asked. "The road will show," said Geralt. "It usually leads somewhere. Next contract, a kikimora." He looked at her. She looked at him, and in her gaze was a question, and simultaneously the knowledge that the answer would be, "I don't know," and an acceptance of that. "Probably," he said. "Good luck with the kikimora. And to you." He touched Roach's flank. "With the next 100 years." She nodded. He rode down the road out of Dol Blathana, and behind him grew quiet, and the forest to the right stood dense and green. Even in late autumn, even when everything around had gone gray, Brokilon held. Perhaps it had always been so. Perhaps it was better now. Geralt didn't know. The medallion was silent. Sometimes that's enough.